everyone, welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to talk about how to draw a spectacled bear. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the spectacled bear. They are multiple colors. I know the sketch kind of looks a little crazy. One of the things that's also nice about these, and I've said it with animals before, their markings are different from bear to bear, right? So that gives us some artistic freedom to sort of draw it out in unique and interesting ways. And you don't have to necessarily look at how the markings are and try to mimic that. So it leaves some artistic freedom for us, and I always appreciate that. So we're just going to get started. I'm starting with this light color. So they've got kind of this lighter color mixed with by the nose. A lot of them seem to have this sort of mid-tone, darker, brownish color, and then they're black around their faces. So yeah, we're going to start by the nose with the lighter color and sort of weave our way through all of the speckled, darker spots. One of the tricks to all of this, especially down in the nose, is in these spots, making sure it still makes sense with the direction that the hair would be going. And the spots were kind of making it a little harder for me to judge that. I think it still works, able to sort of pull them over. It's really going to matter when I add in the speckled effect, the darker brown into the nose. I was also taking the opportunity, since their spots are individual, to add more of the lighter color on the edges of the face so that I don't have to rely as much on the black, because I love letting black stand for its own. I can't with these guys. I am going to have to add in gray for the black, but as much as I can, removing it from it so I don't have to put as much emphasis on it. That's what's nice about having that artistic freedom. I also liked giving him kind of little eyebrows to sort of change his expression, make him look a little bit more neutral. They look pretty cute. They don't look like an angry bear, and so I didn't want him to come off as an angry bear. And so being able to put eyebrows in a way that look more like, he's not angry, I think was also interesting. Now the nose, interestingly, is also the same color as this slightly darker brown. So we'll be adding that in too. And just like before, right, like I'm needing to make sure these little spots, the fur is lining up the same way it would, or that I've already lined it up with the lighter color. And just like always, as I follow the nose around, I allow the edge of the nose to dictate the line direction. I'm coming straight off of it instead of looping it in. It seems like the natural thing to do would be to loop it, but the reality is their hair comes off, as you get here, it sort of has a direction change, so it's more accurate to bring it straight out. It'll help you avoid any conflicts as you get to the edge of the face, and then you can kind of round it as it hits that edge, and then the lights and the highlights and shadows will dictate the rest of that, because the hair often turns inward here instead of out. Now, from what I could tell, they have a little bit of, I don't know that that's true. It was hard to see. I'm gonna have to bring that in anyway. I do think there's a little bit of a gap, but the nose will be the same color, so right now it doesn't really matter. So you bring it straight out until you get to the edge, and then you can loop it. now for the black, which, you know, I do as gray. Well, they're pretty hairy. That's actually why I'm changing the fur direction here. They almost have like a ridge in their face that dips down into this sort of shaggier hair that comes off of them. So I'm trying to indicate his face line that's pushed a little bit more forward than the rest of this. He's pretty cute so far. I'm gonna have the light source coming from over here. Like always, that means it's above and in front of, not behind or next to. Therefore, all of the edges around the entire figure will be in shadow, but there'll be more of a highlight on the side, obviously closer to the highlight. Actually going to start with the black, because I often find that to be one of the hardest to hold my pin pressure back. Because to indicate black, I can't put a whole lot, like I can't put full pin pressure and treat it just like any other color. I have to try and hold it back, but put enough that I can still kind of flesh out shadows and highlights. Pull in this brighter color. Might have to take off the spots for that. Now this is nice full pin pressure. Now some of what's going to be important, blending this really light color into this, you know, gray that I've lightly drawn on here, and I've kind of done it over here a little bit. Not breaching the color into the other color, right? Like having these stray bits of color extend into it. That's going to help temper out the transition a bit and make it look a little bit more natural. So that's some of what I did on the other side, and I'm doing it a little bit on this one as well to help make it look like it's not like this harsh transition from one color to another, which is kind of what we're getting right now. There's a little bit of blending, which you'd have with fur, as the fur kind of, you know, blends over from one color to the next. And that includes sometimes giving little stray, you know, not connected little, you know, bits that are separated from the bulk of the color. And then of course all edges go into shadow, so this edge here is going to be in shadow, but only on the edge, whereas the other side is obviously the whole thing's going to be in shadow. You can see I'm only doing the edge because the rest of it's in highlight. Now in theory some of this might be in highlight because, you know, obviously their heads don't just stop, it goes into the rest of the body, but sometimes it's easier to end a composition like this without a harsh line, and so I'm going to leave this in shadow, and if I decide to build up parts of it to like make it look a little bit more natural, I can do that later. If I decide it's needed after I add everything. There of course will be a bit of a shadow under his face, under his nose, but it wouldn't extend down this far. Depends on the direction of the light source and how extreme it is. But since it's coming from above and in front of and not directly above, you know, some of this would actually be in highlight. And then we get to this side of the face where it would be going into shadow when it's actually kicking into the side of his head again. Just like it is up here. All of this is in shadow. Some of this might be in highlight, but I'm going to go ahead and bring the shadow all the way across the bottom so I can sort out the highlights later like I do sometimes. It's probably going to be easier to sort that out because some of it will be in shadow. It's just a matter of figuring out where the cutoff is, and if I do it all kind of in a shadow, you know, with holding back my pin pressure and therefore in essence in shadow, I'll have more control over sorting out the details of that and making sure it's nice and feathered in correctly. Now I'm going to do the rest of this in highlight for now. It's a safe bet that everything else would be, and then we'll work out the details over where the rest of that would be. Making sure this is tapered into the existing shadow. So right as the light comes underneath, right as we discussed, the light source is coming from this way, and if the light source is coming from this way, then the shadow is going to be this way. And so that's how you sort of determine it follows that same line. So if it's coming from above and in front of, you're going to follow that same angle, and I guess it's a little bit more angled down than what I just had it, so it's more like that, in order to create the shadow. So there'd be highlight all the way up into this point, and then you start building in a shadow as you bring it across. So right, there's highlight all the way through here, and then make sure that tapers into the existing highlight, and then we're going to start angling that down. You want it on that same line. Now we're going to feather this in a bit, right? Like right now it's a pretty extreme transition. It's not going to stay that extreme. And then we build that in so it's subtle. I'm just adding a little bit of extra light, not a full highlight, but a little bit of extra light into that shadowed area. And then we can kind of keep going with this until we decide that it's transitioning to the other side of his body and thus picking up some shadow. I still think some of this is going to have some highlight though, because he's going to be, you know, more forward facing. So you're still going to have a bit of that, and then it's going to taper. Create a nice sort of subtle highlight under here. May adjust somewhat depending on how this last color goes. And then tapering out some of these lines underneath. For the most part we did it, but in some cases I left it too clear, too jagged. Alright, now for the last little bit of color on his face, and then we have his nose, which I just realized that I didn't fill it in. But that's okay. Now it doesn't look like all of them, from what I could see, have this. Looked like a lot of them do have these sort of dots on the nose that are a slightly darker color. Enough of them did that I opted to put it because I thought it added some interest, but it didn't look like all of them did, which was interesting. So that also seems to be, you know, a choice if you want it or not. It's also a subtle transition, so it could just be that in some cases when you're searching it, it's not showing up very well when it would in fact be there. Right, it's not a big color difference. Now his cheek over here would have some highlight on it because the nose isn't going to cast that much of a shadow. It's more flush to their face. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a burst I'm going to do the whole chin in shadow before I add the little strip of highlight it's going to have. Just going to be easier, just like I did, and what I often do, just like I did on the underside of his face, right? And I'll often do it if especially if the space is small, but it just is easier to control the shadows and highlights this way. Right, and now I'm going to add just a bit in between. So, you know, his mouth is rounding up into shadow and then rounding down into shadow. And so in between all of that, I'm going to give it a little highlight. And going into shadow on the edge. And then as we cross the top, still in highlight, and then starting to fade it out over here. Now we have the nose, which is the same color as this, you know, off brown and shaped kind of like a dog's nose, or, you know, shaped like a dog's nose. A lot of bears have that same sort of nose. Right, so under the edge of the nose, it's gonna be in, under the edge of the nostril, I should say, it's gonna be in shadow, right, because that's rounding away. And then all of this is in highlight. So we have, you know, the ears, which are the same gray color, because they're just sort of black fluffs. They're mostly short hair, but there are some longer tufts, I think on the back side. Just a few wisps of hair. May ruffle up some of his hair too. Again, just light pin pressure, not putting full pin pressure on this darker, on the gray, because it's supposed to represent black. So the way I'm going to make that work is by making the gray grayer. But I can't have it so gray that it won't show up on a dark background. Okay, so before we do the eyes, I'm just going to mess up some of his hair. So when I do that, you know, I'm just going to add a few wisps, light pin pressure. Nothing big, changing the direction, but light pin pressure is the key to making it work. Gives the illusion that the hair is longer and looser. Now the hair by the face is not, so I won't be doing it there. It's just along the outside. Hair by the face is pretty short and controlled. Just as you get to this hair out here, it's a little longer. I'm gonna do it to the light as well. Same thing, light pin pressure. Just sort of having it come around. And then we'll do the eyes. Now their eyes are brown and obviously pretty small. So maybe first I'm gonna come in and refine this edge. And then I'm going to give it just a little bit of brighter before his face turns, just that little bit. Just that little bit of highlight. I'm going to do it on the other side as well, under the eye. Not putting a lot of pin pressure, just going in between where there's the dark spots. Really subtle. Same thing on this side. Just a little bit. Nothing big or heavy or fancy. One thing that helps is you bring the eye, bring it down to follow the contour of the loop, right? So you start from a higher position where the pupil is, and you bring it down. If you opt to come up with it, it doesn't look quite right. By creating a little circle within the eye, it helps it look more natural. I always take the select tool, I'm just fixing one little gap. Always take the select tool and make sure it's perfectly circular. And then we are going to add the highlight. So, with the light source coming in from the right, always put the burst of highlight against the pupil here on the opposite side of the highlight, and then you start, filling it in. When you get to the edge, this is in shadow, and then this side of the pupil on the side of the highlight will be in shadow, making sure that the highlight touches this burst of highlight under the pupil. And then it'll go to shadow as it comes to this side. Not a lot of room here. Some of the shadows might turn out a bit brighter. And then just make sure it's all tapered in. And then the same thing on the side. Start with that highlight. Alright, now, last thing to do for the eyes, and something that is one of the most important things, is adding the little light flare. I typically add it on the shadowed side first, so that I can get the sizing right, given that the space is typically going to be a little smaller. Bring it up, but not all the way up. It's always on the side of the light source. I've already changed the thing to white, so we're going to do foreground color and fill, and then bring it right on over. Do the same thing. Alright, so that is how you draw a spectacled bear. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.